So one of the things I have to tell you is that there is no one way to counsel. If somebody tells you that there is, there's something wrong with them. They're OCD, I don't know, there's something wrong with them. Tons of different ways to counsel. Sometimes you'll make contact with your client will like you, sometimes your client won't like you. It's kind of like teaching. Some people, the way that they teach, there are select students that don't like the way that they teach. It's the same. So you have professors that you try to stay away from because you don't really like the way that they present their material or whatever, or maybe you don't like the way they grade. It's the same way with counseling. Everybody has a different personality. I have a different personality, you have a different personality. So what you have to do in counseling is come up with your own way of dealing with other individuals, making contact with other individuals. And making contact is the most important part. But you all have your own techniques, you all have your own personalities, so all of this stuff is extremely important. And the one thing that you need to remember is I'm going to give you general ideas about counseling. Maybe I'll even talk about how I counsel, but at the same time you need to develop your own techniques, your own way of doing things. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now there are people out there that will try to form you in their mold. They'll tell you this is the only way to do it, but the reality is lots of ways to do it. Sometimes being mean is a good way to make contact. Sometimes that's what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody to be organized and to be, well, of course I'm not organized at all, but they're looking for somebody that will give them structure. And for that reason, a lot of times, well, if you're that kind of an individual that can give them that structure, then of course you're going to do a good job of counseling with that select individual. But other individuals, they have their own ideas, and when they come in, they want you to be flexible, that's the kind of counselor that I am. I'm not really a person to tell individuals how to do things. This afternoon, we're going to select a new chair of SBS. That's this department. Why did I tell you that? There's a reason I told you. Oh, I have no organizational skills, so it's not going to be me. I also have over 200 students this semester, and that's like twice as many as anybody else. So probably don't want that. Okay, so how are we going to pass this class? How do we pass this class? Actually, the people in Tuba City have already, you guys may have seen the one, didn't I videotape the other one? Yeah, okay. Well, we'll go back over it. Okay, this class meets at 9 o'clock in the morning. We're going to be counseling each other. We are going to have to develop characters. I was calling it an alter ego last time, but the reality is you're going to be an actor, and you need to develop a problem that you don't actually have. We will use that to counsel each other. I think I'm going to probably put the files online. I think I figured that one out. There is a chapter test after every chapter. It's fairly simple, and for that reason you probably need a textbook. There is a library paper that you'll have to write, and you'll have to write it relatively soon because it needs to be on whatever the problem is that your character has. That will give you background as to how to act when you are one of those people, one of those strange and odd people. Wow.
Oh, it's
I
found everybody in the elevator.
Yeah, the elevator was blocked.
I've heard stories about these.
Almost did last night. You were back in there.
That's exciting.
Oh, it's okay. It's just I'm not too steady in my feet right now.
Wait a minute.
Morning.
Do you want to go?
Yeah.
Okay. And I gave you
Oh, I have my phone.
mental. Okay. Okay, so we're going to be developing characters, and whatever the problem is, it can't be anything that you have suffered in the past or are suffering currently. Oh, I didn't give you anything.
I got one, but
You want another one? Okay. 2 characters, okay, this should be for both of your personalities.
for all of them.
Many aliases. In that case, I need 3 more.
I got 1 here and 2 back there, so, okay. Sorry about that. Oh, you didn't.
Sorry.
Okay. So we're going to be developing characters. And like I said, it can be a problem that you have, it can be a problem that you've had in the past, or a problem that you have currently. We're not real counselors yet, so one of the things that you need to do is make sure that it's not a problem that you have or have had. If you do select something that you had in the past, maybe you were depressed in the past, so you decide that you're going to develop a character that's depressed. One of the problems is that you may have a relapse, and you may become depressed again, because you have to act depressed. And sometimes just acting like you're depressed makes you depressed again, so that we certainly don't want that to happen. We don't want this to be a traumatic event for anybody, so we need to make sure that you select a problem that you don't have, and that you've never had, and that you're not close to. So if you have a darling aunt, your favorite aunt of all times, and she has agoraphobia where she can't go out of the house, since you are so close to her, please do not select that as your problem. So you need to figure something out so that you have a problem. Okay, last semester. What was the last year? We had an individual, and I made up all the problems, and they selected them out of the hat. We had an individual that was being counseled because they wanted to change their gender. That was kind of interesting. One of the things about this class is that we need to talk about some of the problems we may see in the future. Something that you may come in contact with. We can all pretend that anxiety and depression is the only thing that's out there. But the reality is there's a ton of stuff out there. And if there's one thing that you're afraid of, that's going to be the first case that you have. That person is going to have that problem. If you don't think that you can handle somebody with, and Stephanie and I were talking about this yesterday, but if you don't think you can handle somebody who's a pedophile, guess what your first case is going to be? Yeah, exactly. So being a counselor means dealing with anything and everything. Okay, so this is just practice. This is just practice, and you'll get an opportunity to counsel not everybody in the class, because we'll need to cover more material. But that's just part of being a counselor. You may think, well, I'm just going to stay here on the reservation. I'm not going to have any problems. I'm going to help the people here. The reality is you're going to be dealing with a lot of different stuff. There are a lot of veterans on the reservation, so you may be dealing with PTSD. Maybe there is a degree of PTSD in your background, but you're going to have to learn to deal with that. Does that make sense? Okay. You can't shy away from anything, because when you're a counselor, they'll give you a stack of files, and they'll say, these are your clients, deal with it. And that'll be it. One of the biggest problems in counseling is burnout. So if you're too sensitive, if you're so sensitive that you take on your clients' problems, it's not going to take very many clients before that's a lot of problems if you think about it. They're going to give you a stack of 15 or 20. That's 15 or 20 problems, and if you're the kind of person that lives the problems of your clients, it's not going to work. This is not going to work for you. So this is one of the things that we need to determine in here. Do you have the sensitivity to handle the problems, but have the callousness to be able to stay away from it yourself? Yeah. One of the problems with abnormal psychology, those of you who have taken abnormal psychology, you're going through the abnormal psychology book and looking at OCD and you're looking at bipolar disorder and you're thinking, oh my God, every time you come across a new one, you think you have that problem. Well, no. No. If you're that sensitive, then maybe you're in the wrong field. No offense to anyone, anybody. I trained as a counselor back in the 70s. And the amount of counseling that I've done is relatively minuscule, mainly because I didn't really want to do it. You know, I didn't feel like I needed to do it. And then I got into teaching, and now I get to teach the classes. Anyway, what am I doing? Okay. Okay, does anybody have any questions about anything? So you're going to develop a character and you're going to be counseling each other. Before we get to that point, it'll be about 5 or 6 weeks into the semester before we start counseling. Before we do that, we will give you background as to how to do this. Okay, we're not just going to throw you out there and say, you know, cure this person with whatever problem they may happen to have. Oh, okay. Does anybody want to counsel me over my dream last night? The absent-minded professor dream. It was painful. I woke up and I've been just kind of spooked out ever since. You know, weird. I went to a conference at NAU and I got lost on campus. Everybody kept saying, "Oh, it's just over there." Every time I asked somebody where it was, and I headed over in that direction. It's the big building. It's right over there. It's the big building. You can't miss it. It's right beside the library. The library is huge. The library is 2 stories, right? And it's big this way. And I'm looking for a tall building. They said it's big. I'm looking for something tall. You know, so I'm wandering all over campus. Anyway, that was part of my dream. Not NAU, but I got lost. And I kept getting trapped in groups of people. I don't have actylophobia, but I don't like to be crowded. I've been in cities, Amsterdam. Has anybody ever been to Amsterdam? Oh, it's so crowded. It is so crowded. Has anybody ever been to Tokyo? Even more crowded. Oh my God. And I'll tell you, if you go to Japan, the Japanese, they live inside their brains, not outside. So they'll get right up next to you, you know, and start blowing their noses, you know, and they're rubbing up against your arm and blowing their Anyway, Asians don't have the same sense of, they don't have the same personal space that we do in the West. Okay. Is there any questions about anything? How else are we going to pass this class? I'm not here to not pass anybody, okay? I'm here to pass everyone. As far as I'm concerned, if you get all the material correctly, if you understand all the material, then you're going to pass. That's just the way it is. I don't feel that I need to give a select number of A's, a select number of B's, a select number of C's. If everybody earns an A, I'll give everybody an A. And let the administration complain about it. This is a mental health history. It's your fictional biography. Come up with a name that ain't yours, that isn't anywhere close to yours. It may be difficult if you decide, and we were talking about this last time, it may be difficult if you select a name, a race that you don't represent. Okay. Be Japanese. See if that works. You know, Joe can be Mongolian because he read a book about Mongolia last year. That ought to be interesting. Yeah, that's right. No, it's easier if you're your own race. It really will be. If you're African American, you know, what do we know about African Americans? I was going to tell you a story about getting. Oh, it's in the next class. Okay, about never getting arrested. I've never been arrested, but I've been jacked up before by the cops.
No, wait a minute.
I know. You know what jacked up means?
You're arrested.
No. They just stop you and they pat you down and they, you know, put the fear.
Oh, harassment. Okay.
Yeah, it's harassment is what it was. I'll tell the other class that. Okay. Okay. Anything else? 700 points. I'm going to probably take out the final counseling session, because we won't have to worry about that. The participation points have to do with the counseling that we will be doing with each other. I do have a character, and if there is an odd number in here, then somebody will get to counsel me. Like I said, you have to have a problem that you don't have or have never had. Mine is a drunk, so you're going to really enjoy Sly Tishomingo. That's my alter ego. He's a bit of a drunk. Okay, 50 chapter quizzes, 5 the library paper, answer discussion questions for each chapter, and then the fictional biography, and then the weekly participation points. There probably won't be 150 points. There'll probably only be 100, because we'll start at the 5th week. Okay, any questions?
I have one. In our syllabus, you are listing discussions. Is that going to be on the regular web, or do we have to manage to get into Blackboard?
It's Blackboard.
Hate that program. We just don't dance well together.
Okay. So be careful. You need to think about all of the friends that you have, all the relatives that you have, and what their problems are. Don't select one of those if you're close to that individual. Okay? I don't know how else to talk about it. Curtis and I were talking about schizophrenia last time, right? Yeah, okay. Schizophrenia is a tough one because counseling doesn't work. For one thing, counseling doesn't work with schizophrenia, especially if they're in crisis, because they're not making any sense. Most of their focus is inward rather than outward. You really can't communicate with them very well. So schizophrenia is kind of a difficult one to, and you certainly don't want to act like you're schizophrenic, because sometimes it sticks.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're in crisis yourself, going, oh my God. What has Bradway done to me now? This is horrible. An introduction to counseling. Okay. Chang, Scott, and Decker. Actually, this is a really good textbook. I've taught this, like I told the individuals last time, I taught this class for 25 years. I mean, 25 years ago I started teaching this class. And this is one of the best books I've seen. But then again, in time, I started in psychology back in the 1970s. And psychology's changed a ton. Actually, psychology changes almost every day, at least every year. And this is a really good book. So Chang, Scott, and Decker. They're 3 ladies out of Indiana University. I have no idea what that sculpture's all about. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me see if I can get through my chapter. Huh. He's creating himself. That must have something to do with the chapter. Oh, importance of self-understanding. Sure, yeah, he's creating himself. He's sculpting himself, as confusing as that is. Oh, influences on personal development. One of the things that you have to do is understand the client's personal beliefs. This is really important, especially here, if you think about it. One of the things that you're going to have to gauge, and maybe you will have to gauge this from the very first moment you see them without even talking to them, you have to determine how traditional they are. This is something that we don't talk about any place except here on the reservation, or a reservation, actually. How traditional is this select individual? Do they identify with their culture? How directly do they identify with their culture? How much do they identify with the Western culture? Sometimes you can look at somebody and tell if they do identify with the Western culture or their native culture. And this is very, very important. You may look at somebody and say, well, they look Dene to me, and then it turns out that they're not. There's something, they're another group. Right. Right? They may be Hispanic.
Will these slides be on Blackboard?
Yeah, they're on Blackboard. I hope they're on Blackboard. They're supposed to be on Blackboard. Okay.
Okay.
They are.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So you need to understand the individual's personal beliefs. This will be influenced by different aspects of the client's culture, of course. The client's race is extremely important, their race. Do they identify with their race? Last night I was watching Donald Trump's speech. Now, I'm not going to say anything political, but there was a guy right behind him that said that it was one African-American guy, and he kept standing up and holding up a poster that said, "Blacks for Trump." He had another one that said, "Trump isn't a racist."
That was on the shirt. That was on the
It was,
shirt.
oh, that was on his shirt, okay. 2020.com, yeah, if you want to identify with this guy. Anyway, it was an African-American, the only one that I saw in the crowd, but that's not important. And he was right behind Donald Trump, which was kind of interesting. It was kind of an interesting group, because I was watching them throughout the speech, and watching to see if they rotated people in, you know, behind there, because everybody was looking at the people behind him. There was a veteran back there with a blue shirt on with stars on it, and he had his Navy cap on, telling us what ship he served on. It was really kind of an interesting group. At one point, right before the end, well, it was about 15 minutes before the end, a young lady came in, and she started holding up signs. But she was young. Everybody else back there was kind of old, I guess. Say that. They didn't look as young as she was, okay? She looked like she was in her 20s or something. And she started holding up signs. Really kind of interesting. Anyway, so the client's race is important. How closely do they identify with their race? Here's something that's interesting, or here's something that you need to think about. Were they raised in that culture? There's an irritating advertisement about Heritage.com on television. This lady says, "I had my DNA checked, and I found out that I'm 26% American Indian." Or she says Native American. Native American. I'd like to find out more about that. Like you're going to all of a sudden find your culture, and you were raised. You know, you're 100 years old, and you're all of a sudden you're going to turn Indian. There's another one with an African American lady that finds out that she has Senegalese background, and she puts on the hat. And she said, "Oh, it made me, you know, made me." Your culture is the culture that you're raised in. Okay. So if you were raised here on the reservation, that is your culture. Okay. If you were raised off the reservation, you probably lack this culture. Okay. You can try to get it back. You can try to get it back, but this lady's obviously a white lady that is a wannabe Native American. It just irritates me to no end. Anyway, so the client's race, how strongly do they identify with the racial structure? If people that live in urban areas, a lot of times they don't identify themselves by their group, by their race, but by their friend group, what friends they have. If an individual is African American and they were raised in a white community, what culture do they adhere to? This is what happened to Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy was raised in New Jersey in a white community. So how closely did he identify as an African American? One of the reasons he was so funny was because he was so acceptable to the white community, because that was his culture. The white community was his culture. Since then, he has adhered to the African American culture a little bit more. But he really, when he first started in comedy, I mean, he was on Saturday Night Live when he was 19 years old. But his culture was white, because that's where he was raised, despite the fact that he was African American. And this is sometimes a problem, if you think about it. So the question is, how strongly do they identify with the racial structure? If there's more than one race represented, which is the most important? We see individuals that have a foot in one race and a foot in the other race, or in another culture. Which one do they adhere to the most? A lot of times it has to do with the mother, because the mother raises them. Okay. I have a niece who is a great niece, whose father is black and her mother is white. But they kicked the father out when she was like when she was a baby. And now she has no black heritage. Well, she does have black heritage, of course, but she doesn't really understand the black culture because she was never raised by anybody that was African American. And if you know that she's African American, you can see African American features in her. But if you didn't know, you wouldn't even notice. You would just assume she was white. But she was raised in a white community. So when she went to counseling, and this lady's got all kinds of interesting problems that don't have anything to do with race, it has to do with her nutty grandmother that isn't related to me, okay? Okay. It has to do with her nutty grandmother. When she started going to counseling, of course, she grabbed a hold of this idea that you hate me because I'm black, and everybody's going, really? I didn't know you were, you know, one of those guys. Anyway, really kind of strange. If there's more than one, it's a multiracial aspect of the fact. Multiracialism, of course, is one of the things that sometimes causes problems. One of the most difficult things is to not understand who you are and where you come from. Of course, you know who your family is, but when you go out of the house, who do you identify with? So is it possible to be Caucasian and to live in a black community and have all black friends and speak with a black patois? Is it possible to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. And of course, we've seen comedy routines, movies where white guys are, well, Eminem's kind of that way. Yes, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we've seen that. Yeah, so it's possible. So yeah, it has to do with where you're raised and who you are. A counselor needs to recognize that their own culture might influence the way that they see and interpret their clients. This is the biggest problem that American Indians have had dealing with federal government. Federal government doesn't understand who American Indians are. They send people down here who have expertise in accounting or in whatever, but their expertise, I can assure you, their expertise is not in Dene culture. And this has been a problem. No matter what the reservation is, this is a problem. And they don't have a clue who you are. And this is a huge problem because they're not going to do a good job. They can't do a good job. And of course they have all this knowledge. Teachers are the same way. PhDs are the worst. PhDs think we have all this information that we've accumulated at wherever we went to college, and that knowledge is absolute. So we don't understand when when we go to a different culture, that maybe our knowledge doesn't apply to that culture. And some of us get really stiff about this. Some of us think that we have all the answers. And that's the problem with the federal government. They've got all the answers. They know how to take care of alcoholism on the reservation because, by golly, they developed a program in the barrios of Los Angeles, and it worked perfectly in the barrios of Los Angeles. If you don't understand what that means, that's the Hispanic community in Los Angeles. So they develop a program that works there, and then they try to take all those brilliant ideas which work there, and they try to move it every place around the United States. Does it work with African Americans in Chicago? No. Does it work with natives on reservations? No, it doesn't work. It worked in the barrio in Los Angeles. And they do this all the time. Somebody comes up with a brilliant idea and they think that they can apply it to everybody. And of course that doesn't work. And it's the same problem with PhDs. And I'll tell you what, if this is the first reservation that I had worked on, I'm sure that I would be spewing different ideas, but I have worked on reservations before. And I understand that my knowledge is limited. I have to understand you before I can understand what knowledge I should be trying to give you. And luckily I've done that before. So. And I made an ass of myself. So now I'm okay. I'm not as much of an ass as I was before. All right, I am. Sure. Not, well, It's not as extreme as it was.
I want to interrupt with a question. When you went from Fort Belknap and you come down here, you were basically entering into a new cultural society.
Right.
How difficult was it to go from A to B?
You know, it's really kind of interesting because it's more like A to Z. Because I knew people that were Dene up on Fort Belknap. Of course, they were acting like people on Fort Belknap, but it was difficult. You know, there's the vast difference between the two cultures. And thank you for mentioning that. I wish I'd
The reason I asked this question is that I found out traditionally on Dene we do not go out in the sun during the eclipse.
Right.
My sister, who lives by Cherokee tradition, sent me a little thing, a little article that says that we have to go out into the light and make a lot of noise and scare away the frog that's eating the sun and the moon.
Well, I hope you guys did that because we
Of
need
course
the
not,
sun.
we stayed in the house with our curtain closed.
Well, here, of course, they do it one way.
And then another friend who is Lakota, he says, wow, you sleep with the darkness. We go in, we go to sleep, we wake up when the sun's out again. And so that's the Lakota tradition.
Well, I was talking to a black lady from the Blackfeet Reservation, and she said that the women have to stay inside, but the men go out and they shoot arrows or guns into the air to try to kill the moon so that the sun comes back. So the men go outside and make noise,
Yeah.
but the
It's
women have to stay
amazing the
inside.
different cultures.
Right, yeah, it's different cultures. But if you think about American Indians, if you look at American Indians and who you were before the encroachment of Western society, almost everybody refers to themselves as the people, or the holy people, Dene. Holy people, the Comanche called themselves the Namana, which means the people. The Nez Perce were the Nimepu, which means we the people. The Tonkawa were the real people. That's what Tonkawa means. It's kind of cool. Everybody's the real people. Which makes, I don't know, Europeans coming over, I guess they were the unreal people, and I don't know.
No, they're the aliens.
I know. It's kind of weird. So everybody called themselves the people, right? And that made everybody else not the people, I guess, or somebody else. As white people were wandering around trying to put names on things, of course they were wandering around with other natives or with natives, and they were telling them what they called those people, and usually it was their enemy. You know, these are our enemy, and so Sioux means the enemy. That's confusing as hell. Okay. The Spanish, of course, gave you guys a really not very nice name. Thank you. So, idiots. Why didn't they just ask somebody, you know? They asked the guy standing right next to him, what do you call this guy? He's the guy who tries to kill me all the time. Oh, good name. So what is that in your language? Oh, Comanche. Okay, that's good. Okay. That's what Comanche means. It means the people that try to kill us. And it's a Ute word that means the people that try to kill us. But they, of course, they don't call themselves the people that try to kill us. They call themselves the Namana, which means the people. A counselor needs to recognize that their racial background might influence the way that they see others, especially if those others are from another race. Once upon a time, this was a really serious problem. All the social workers in the United States, all the psychologists in the United States were white. Well, a lot of the people with problems were African American. Once upon a time, back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, they didn't recognize anybody else. The only minority in the United States that they really recognized were African Americans. And they didn't refer to them as African Americans. So this was a really serious problem, because what do we know about African Americans? Well, the only information that we have is whatever information has been given to us. And a lot of that information was stereotypes. So they had all this interesting information about African Americans. They talk different. They have big lips. What else do they have? They're taller. They have dark skin, you can't trust them. All of this information were stereotypes that they had about African Americans. So since all the social workers and all the psychologists were white, this was a really serious problem. They did not deal very well with these select individuals, especially in the South, where there was a lot of prejudice. A little bit worse than it was in the North. But the North had the same problem because these people had never been around African Americans either, so they adhered to these stereotypes. If you look at, my wife is from Georgia. She was born in 1951. I have a copy of her birth certificate. I have a copy of her birth certificate, and you can be one of two things. You can either be white or you can be colored. That was how they referred to somebody who wasn't white. So of course she was born in 1951. So they had those really strange stereotypes. A counselor needs to come to grips with their own ethnicity and how that influences who they are and how they see others. So if you have a problem with white people, guess what? Who your first client is going to be? Sorry. Do you know how white people act? Are we all greedy? Well, some of us are, but not all of us. Not every damn single one of us. There, you can find, I know, maybe 1%. No, wait, 1/10%. Aren't greedy, but
Did you say are not greedy or are?
are not greedy. I'm just being facetious.
0.100 or should
No,
I say
point.
0.00001?
I was thinking point. Anyway, so if you have problems with another group, you need to deal with that. We need to figure these things out before you become a counselor. And I'm sorry about that. It's just the way it works. One of the great things about being in the military is there are no races in the military. You just have the guy that stands beside you. And you got to trust that guy to be the one that has your back, that saves your life. And there are no races. They do not recognize race. And it was really kind of cool because I was in the military for, well, 12 years. I was in for 12. My wife was in for 24. But we were wandering around the military for 30 years. And it's a rarefied environment. It really is. Do they have racial problems in the military? Of course they do. Of course they do. But it's mostly with the young kids. Anybody that's been in the military for more than one tour, for more than one enlistment, they don't have that problem anymore because the military can order you not to be prejudiced. And if you...
It's a form of a different psychology.
I'm sorry?
It's a form of a different psychology.
It
learning
is.
how to adhere to that as far as everyone being green.
Right.
You know, so I think that plays a different role as far as training a person into thinking that way as well. So,
yeah. Sometimes it doesn't work. And most of those guys don't only last one enlistment. A good example would be Tim McVeigh, who was in the Army during Desert Shield. No, is that right? Was he? Yeah, he was in the military in Desert Shield. That was in '93 when they liberated Kuwait, and he was there, and he was on a tank, and he fired a .50 caliber machine gun, which rips really big holes into people. And that was what he did over there. And evidently he wanted to stay in the military, but he couldn't because there was something wrong with his thinking. And then he blew up the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, as stupid as that is. But he was a military guy. It's where he learned to put the explosives together, unfortunately. But he only lasted from one enlistment. Those of us who were in for more than one, you know, that's the only way you can survive in the military is by losing all of that idea. When you look at somebody, you don't see what they are, you see who they are, I guess, rather than you have to look inside. So you don't see race anymore, you don't see ethnicity anymore. You can't because that guy's got to save your life, which is kind of cool. And anyway, they can order people around, but we can't order you guys not to have any prejudices. Sorry. Self-understanding is an essential step in understanding your clients. You need to understand yourself, and this is a tough one. This can be really, really hard. You need to deal with, before you're done in a counseling program. You need to deal with all the problems that you have. If you can't deal with those the problems that you have, when you start counseling, you're going to be counseling, you're going to be projecting your problems on that select individual. This is one of the reasons why most counselors seek counseling while they are counseling. Okay, they seek counseling. It's to make sure that they haven't developed any problems, any psychological problems that they will project on another individual. Now, this is tough. This is a really tough one. There are multiple influences on how you see yourself and interpret the world around you. Your culture, race, and ethnicity are important. Your gender and sexual orientation are influential. Your socioeconomic status, spirituality, and religion, life stage, family of origin, and disability or ability are influential. Religion can get in the way. I had a boss when I was at my last institution who kept trying to convert me. Damn it. Why do they keep trying to convert me? Why am I so important to God? Or whoever the hell he was. Anyway, he kept trying to convert me. And he wouldn't leave me alone. This was really important to him, that I would be the one that he converted. So religion kind of gets in the way. And when it came time to either give me an increase in my wages, guess what happened next? Well, he couldn't convert me, so guess who didn't get a raise that year? Yeah, exactly. This stuff gets in the way. Sexual harassment can get in the way. So all of these things are really important. Life stage or family of origin. Okay. The level of stress demands on your life is important as well. How much stress do you have? When I left here in May, everything was going great. My son had a new job. My daughter had a new job. They'd just gotten fired from their old job because they tangled politically. It was a political entanglement. They're kind of liberal, and their administration was Trumpian. Was relatively conservative. So they tangled with the administration, so they both had to find a new job. Well, my daughter found a job in Iowa, and my son found a job right there in Florida. So we had to find my daughter a house. So all summer, my stress level just continued to increase. And then in July, the father of her child decided that he wanted to keep them in Florida. So he filed so that she couldn't move. She couldn't take her new job. That's not right, is it? It didn't seem right to me. Bastard, what the hell's wrong with him? So he wants his son to live in poverty because he wants to see him every other weekend? He doesn't care where the kid lives? That's not right. That's my point of view. So starting in July, we had this whole court case hanging over our heads. A lot of stress, just tons of stress, as you can imagine. And my daughter started to fold. She started to knuckle under. She was going to let him control her, this guy who hates her to the extent that hasn't lived with her since he impregnated her. We're going to allow him to tell her where she can live. Because in Florida, you have to live within 50 miles of. Does that make sense? That didn't make any sense to me. Anyway, lots of stress. So my wife went down to Florida, so she's been gone for 2 months. And now she's not up here, she's in Iowa helping my daughter. Lots of stress, just tons and tons of stress. So it all depends on what's going on in your life. So right now I'm under a lot of stress, not only that, but Christopher Jones resigns and I get all of his students. Not all of them. Actually, Sarah got 36 of his students, so I only picked up some.
You say Chris Jones resigned already?
Yeah, he's gone.
He's got the online
Not anymore.
socio whatever.
Social psychology, that's my class now.
Oh, okay.
So you have to put up with me in that class. Good luck with
You
that.
and Blackboard. Oh boy, it's gonna have fun.
Wow.
I need to talk to you after class.
Yeah, we we had to roll all those classes into online classes because I don't have time to drive out to Tuba City. How far is Tuba City? 3 hours? Is that all? 3 hours? Oh, I could run out there. I've got a little red car.
It's according to how slow you drive.
I don't.
You can ride in my car.
Oh,
It's quick.
my car's only got 2 seats, so.
Well, I've got 4, but the thing is, mine does not go under 80.
You must have a really serious time driving around campus.
I do, I have to pedal.
Multicultural competence is a significant predictor of satisfaction in counseling. Multicultural competence, whether you understand people of a different group. And you can look at somebody and think, hey, you know, that guy's just like me. And then you get to talking to them, and they use a vernacular language that you don't understand. He's cool, or he's hip, or he's, I don't know what they are now. Smoky in there, I don't know. Anyway, multicultural competence. So you need to be able to talk to people and use their language. Understand what they're saying when they say something. It's usually a swear word, so I won't use any. Anyway. Difficulties may arise from unacknowledged differences in perception. Oh, jeez. Yeah, that's a problem with emails. If you email somebody, oh, wait a minute, I've got the time right here, 3:19. All right. If you email somebody, they get to interpret what you just said, and sometimes they interpret it. I don't know if you've got friends that always interpret everything negatively. Okay. Yeah. So you say, have a great day, and they say, what do you mean by that? You know, that kind of. Are you being facetious? No, I wanted you to really have a good day. No, you don't.
I take offense to that.
Yeah, you do. Exactly.
That's the one I get.
Yeah. And that's part of the problem with the internet right now, because the people that voted for Hillary are really upset about the election and all the politics that are going on, and you know, and the two groups just can't communicate. One side says one thing, and the other side, oh my God, what did you say? You can't say that. It's just terrible. So they've stopped communicating. Since the election, I've lost almost all my friends because they're all conservative. Well, they were my friends. They're not anymore. They won't communicate with me.
Then how do you consider them your friends?
They were my friends
If they're
before.
not loyal.
When we don't talk about politics, we're fine. But now that, you know, everybody's talking about politics, everybody's at each other's throat.
Well, maybe they should all just back up, be quiet, and get the media out of Trump's business and let him try to do what he can do.
It ain't gonna happen.
Well, we all know
It
that.
ain't gonna happen. And we don't want it to happen, those of us who are relatively liberal. We don't want it to happen. I am going to my 50th high school reunion. I'm that old. I graduated from high school 50 years ago. Yeah, 50 years ago. Okay.
What year?
1967.
Oh, 2 years.
1967. I'm going to my 50th high school reunion. We keep getting email after email. Please do not mention politics at the reunion because we don't want any bloodshed. Really? I have a friend that I communicated with for years, and it wasn't Trump. It was Bush. He discarded me over George W. Bush. So, and he's So I graduated from high school with this guy. I can't imagine. The last time I saw him was at a. We were honoring our track coach, and he was on the other side of the room, and I went over to shake his hand, and you know, I'm chasing this guy all around the room because he's moving away from me, and he left just because I wanted to shake his hand. And I'm the jackass who didn't stop chasing him. Okay. It is critical to examine beliefs, assumptions, and biases that the individual has. There's nothing you can do about their biases. If they are biased against, if they hate, if they're a neo-Nazi who hates everybody except, you know, Nazis, other Nazis, there's nothing you can do about it. You have to treat them, you have to treat them in any way you possibly can. You have to deal with that, but not deal with it. So you have to accept them for who they are. You can't change who they are. If they're prejudiced against African Americans, you can't change that. You have to accept them for who they are. And you have to counsel them as if that is normal. Never mentioning that. Of course, they should have told me that when I was dealing with my friend and chasing him around the room. No, of course not. Okay, so beliefs, assumptions, and biases, you can't do anything except accept them. It's equally important to understand the culture's influence on their clients, and I can't stress that enough here. So you have to understand how traditional somebody is, and how much they adhere to their culture. And maybe somebody in their 70s and you assume that they can speak Dene, but maybe they don't. Maybe they can't speak it at all. I have a friend that I talked to all last year. His wife doesn't speak English. And of course he speaks English with a really interesting accent. He brought his brother over the other day, and his brother doesn't speak Dene, which is kind of interesting, because he can't speak to this guy's wife. It's really kind of interesting. But he does. He's his younger brother, but he doesn't speak Dene at all. Anyway, so you have to understand how much they adhere to their culture. You may see somebody that's African American and assume that they're cool with it, or whatever, they're cool. But the reality may be they were raised in a white community, and they don't adhere to any black, like the guy behind Trump last night that was raising his signs. The only black face in the crowd. It's really kind of interesting. We read about other races, cultures, and ethnicities. We can do that. One of the things, if you know that you have a client that's coming in who is different, you need to understand who he is. When I first came here, I read all the Tony Hillerman books, and I brag about that. There's like 17 of them. Is Hillerman accurate as far as his culture is concerned? No, he's not. But actually Hillerman was better than reading the book Dene. They gave me the book Dene, and I thought, well, this isn't even history. What are they talking about? I got more out of Hillerman than I got out of that book, as confusing as that is. Okay, so you need to try to find out about that group. Up at Fort Belknap, I'll use this as an example. Up at Fort Belknap, back in the 1880s, a priest from Washington, D.C. came out to the reservation and spent, I don't know, 10 or 15 years there, and he wrote books. He wrote 2 books about the culture and about the religion and whatnot. That's the only information they have about their culture before, in the 1880s. Literally, it's the only information they have. And it's a white guy's interpretation of what that culture is about. So you have to be really careful as to what you read. And you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Like Hillerman. Hillerman talks a lot about the Dene culture, but some of it may be inaccurate. The guy's a white guy, and he lived in Farmington, and then he lived in Gallup, and then he lived in Albuquerque. So, how much information does he have anyway? We know the names of the Leaphorn was one of the guys, and Chi was another guy. Anyway, so you can read this stuff, but you need to take it with a grain of salt. You have to understand that this person has a select amount of information, and maybe that information, some of the information may be accurate, some of it may be inaccurate. Okay. We recognize the strengths and weaknesses of dominant and minority racial groups. White people think one way, minority groups may feel like they are being dominated, I guess. It's like the word I can come up with. So you have to understand that, or recognize that. We develop meaningful relationships with people from various racial and cultural groups. We can gain a different perspective on all people if we deal with these individuals. Now, the other thing that you have to remember if the only person that, if the only Dene individual that I had ever met was Aaron, how typical is he? Well, that's that piece of information. He may not be typical at all. He may act completely different. I had a friend, one of the first native friends I ever had was a Laguna. He was from the Laguna Pueblo. And he was married to a Kiowa. He was a really good friend of mine. We rode to work every day, and we had long conversations about him growing up in the desert and me growing up in Indiana on the farm. And we were both in the military, and he, what he did for a living was he euthanized beagles. What? He killed Snoopy? That was his job. He killed beagles. He worked for the environmental research at Wright-Patt Air Force Base, and they would do research with a beagle. They would put them under a lot of pressure, or they would send them they'd spin them around in one of those things, in a centrifuge, and then they would kill them and do autopsies on them to discover or to find out what had happened with their bodies. As it turns out, beagles, this small dog, this small hunting dog, has almost the same circulatory system as humans, as it turns out. And none of the white people wanted to kill the dogs. So his job was basically to euthanize the dogs because it didn't bother him to kill the dogs. I know, it's kind of strange, kind of weird. Anyway, that was his job. I mean, he didn't care. It didn't bother him. He'd never owned a beagle before. He didn't see Snoopy when he was euthanizing the dog. And of course, he had to do it in a manner that wouldn't disturb the circulatory system. So it's not like he took out a .45 and blew its head off or something. You know, he couldn't do that. It was interesting. He was a neat guy. He told me if I would bring him deerskin, that he'd make me a set of moccasins. I never did. At that time in Indiana and Ohio, there weren't any deer. There were none. I mean, I saw my first deer when I was like 20 years old, 21, 22 years old. I lived in Indiana all my life in a forest, and I never saw any deer. Now they're all over the place. Write that down. Deer are all over the place. Yeah, you got it. Okay. This is important stuff. Anyway, so you know, I drive between here and Albuquerque all the time. I always stop at the Route 66, the place where they sell Laguna burgers. Yeah, those guys don't have anything like my friend at all. I'm just wondering what's going on.
No beagles?
The beagle killer, yeah. I certainly don't bring my beagle in to visit the people on Laguna. That was his job. And his wife was Kyle, which was kind of interesting. Go into that. I used to live in Oklahoma with the Comanche and the Kiowa. They were interesting people. By developing relationships with colleagues and mentors who are willing to discuss cultural and racial issues, it's always good to have a friend so that you can bounce ideas off of people. So if they are of a different group, of a different ethnic group. I've learned more being here talking to my friend, Herbert, who comes by from time to time. He gives me all kinds of interesting information, and I get a lot of good information from you guys. But if I had a cultural question to ask, I have all kinds of people to ask. I've asked Curtis questions, I've asked Stephanie questions. Huh? What am I doing here? Explain this to me. So yeah, I can ask my students this kind of stuff, and they will give me information. So if you have friends, or even colleagues, people that aren't your friends, but individuals that you can bounce an idea off of. Watching films about other races is a good way to understand that race, but of course you have to look at who the director is.
Yeah, that's
You
what I
have
was
to
going to say,
figure,
to be careful.
wait a minute, how stereotypical is this, and how accurate is this? This may not really work in the United States as well as it works overseas. If you want to find out about the Japanese, watch Japanese films. Don't read their comic books. That's not going to work. Yeah, read a comic book about the Japanese. The Japanese are kind of interesting people. But yeah, watch films about that group. A lot of they have a black Stars and black HBO, don't they? They have all black movies on an HBO channel. I have HBO. Participating in cultural activities or visiting other countries, that's a good way to find out about people. This is a ceremony from Bangladesh. As you can see, this lady is holding onto her legs, and she's balancing this thing on top of her head. And I don't know, it looks like and the guys that are behind are going on. I have a student from Ashford who is from Bangladesh. And I asked him about this. He said, that's not right. I don't know what that means. Anyway, yeah. So you can visit other countries. I've been to a lot of different countries. You've been to a lot of different countries. Okay. Did you stay? Of course, you probably stayed on the base. You didn't leave the base. That's fine. We did. We always went into it.
We were in his class with the army.
Well, we were carrying sidearms, so I guess, yeah, it's a little bit different.
We didn't get liberal as much as you did.
Oh, I probably got shot at as much as you did when I was in Germany and Japan. I think I got shot at more in Germany than I got shot at in Vietnam. I got shot down twice in Vietnam. Culture has a strong influence on the roles that many people see as appropriate. Proper behavior of children toward parents, a level of independence and autonomy of children. How much autonomy is there? The way that they raise children on the Fort Belknap Reservation, completely different from anything I'd ever seen before. Up there, the grandparents do most of the raising of the children. And the maternal, one of the maternal uncles was very important to their culture. But there seemed to be a lot of independence and autonomy. The children had a lot of independence and autonomy. Patterns of communication between parents and children, family boundaries and responsibilities, expressions of emotions. If you're dealing with the Eastern culture, with the Eastern world, if you go to Japan or Korea, they don't really show emotion very much. My wife and I keep telling this strange story about not seeing my wife for 6 months, and I got on an airplane to go over to Korea. She was stationed in Korea. I hadn't seen her in 6 months. So you can imagine I was really anxious to see her. And she was equally anxious to see me, I hope. Anyway, so we get off the plane, and of course I'm with all these Koreans and all, getting off the plane with all these Koreans, and we're all jumbled around. And here comes my wife. She runs toward me, and she jumped up and she circled me with her legs, and I gave her a really big kiss. Okay. Well, I'm from the United States. She's from the United States. We're Americans. We're two, white Americans from the United States. Of course, that's a redundancy, isn't it? But the Koreans, of course, they didn't even touch each other. They came up to each other and they bowed. They bowed to each other. They didn't even touch each other. And here we are, lip locked in the middle of the air. People are filming us because it looks like pornography.
Probably was.
This is before all that took place. Anyway, expression of emotions. So they didn't show affection like we did in the United States. You would expect people to at least touch each other. But in other countries, of course, they are a little bit more reticent than we are. I was up in Canada, and it's kind of, they don't really get that close to each other. Really kind of strange. You see them walking down the road, and you're down the sidewalk, and they're not really next to each other. They're not touching each other. And here my wife and I, playing grab ass and walking down. I don't know. The Colonel, you never know what she's going to do next. My wife's a retired Colonel. Cultural values can influence feelings about work. Of course, on base, you can't you can't touch each other. And I had to walk on my wife's left side so that she could salute me. You know, that's kind of strange. And I wanted to hold her hand. You know, but that's not right. Cultural values can influence feelings about work. Cultural values can influence feelings about education. And the reality is I'm really impressed with the people here on this reservation. You guys are really serious about your education. You tangle with other cultures, and sometimes they don't have the same ideas about education. I can remember up north, I had a student that was like one class away from graduating, and something happened in her family, and she just took off. She was gone. All she needed to do was finish that one class, and it just wasn't important to her. Her family is far more important, and I'm not going to argue with family, of course. But you guys are really serious about your education. I really appreciate that. You guys take notes. When I was at Ashford, nobody took notes. Not only did they not take notes, but usually they were on their cell phones. And probably texting each other. What a jackass. It drove me crazy. These people would walk in the halls, and they would be walking with somebody, and they'd be texting back and forth. They weren't even talking to each other. They were texting each other. As stupid as that seems. You know, you'd say hello to somebody, and they wouldn't even see you. Or they'd have those huge earphones on. So, it just seemed kind of not right to me. Anyway, cultural values can influence feelings about healthcare. There's a group called the Christian Scientists. Christian Scientists don't believe in going to the doctor. Christian Scientists don't believe in getting blood. So if they need a blood transfusion, they can't get a blood transfusion. They don't believe in it. As confusing as that is. Jehovah's Witnesses, they have their own strictures as well as far as healthcare is concerned. So this is one of the things that you have to understand, that people are different and have different ideas. Not all white people are the same. Scientology is nuts. It's crazy. Oh, wait a minute, I just said something negative about a religion. I'm sure none of you are Scientologists. Most of them live in California, in Hollywood, actually. But wow, they do some really, really strange things. But Christian Scientists are also a little bit different. Different religions have different ideas about things, and you have to understand that. Cultural values can influence feelings about religion. Religion is a tough one, and here I just attacked the Scientologists, and of course Curtis is leaving because I offended him. All you Scientologists out there.
Go ahead, go.
Oh, I got it right there. You did it, okay. Anyway, yeah, this is a tough one. You've got to be aware of other religions. You have to understand them. You have to understand the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism. You have to understand that Jewish people have different ideas, and there are different forms of Judaism. Some of them are extremely traditional, where they dress in the black clothes and they can't cut their side locks. They grow beards, but there are other Jewish individuals that are less stringent on the strictures of their religion. So you need to understand all of these things. When you see somebody come in the room, you can say, well, he's obviously a Mormon, he's got blonde hair. Well, no Mormons have blonde hair. No, of course they don't. But you need to understand their religion, and you need to understand the strictures to that religion. The more you know, and this is something I was saying in another class, the more knowledge you have about the world, the easier it's going to be for you. Because you won't get blindsided by religion, or you won't get blindsided by race or ethnicity. You need to be open to all of these things. And the more knowledge that you have, the more reading you do in whatever magazine, it really doesn't matter, or the more television that you watch, news, not Kevin Can Wait or whatever. This is how fat people act on television. Yeah, the more information that you have, the better off you're going to be. The easier it's going to be for you to transition these things, for you to understand what's going on. Okay? I've got degrees in all kinds of interesting areas, and I think it's helped me deal with different people because I understand religions, I understand cultures, and I've been to different places, and I didn't hardly shoot anybody. Usually they were shooting at me.
But that's funny though, it's what you mentioned about your orientation, or wherever you, your conference that you went to, where all these psychologists, you said, they basically argue with one another, like their concepts, and you would think that they would, I don't know, maybe go back to the basics and keep an open mind to all the psychologists.
An open mind, exactly, but no, that's not the way it works. No. It was kind of interesting. When I first got here, Sarah and I, we tangled over and over and over again. Usually it was about psychology. Come on, we're both PhDs in psychology. So shouldn't we get along? Shouldn't we be open-minded? And eventually, of course, we came to a point where we both agreed. We hardly ever even talk to each other anymore. So, we talk to each other. But yeah, it was really kind of interesting. It was like we were putting our PhDs up and saying, this is my PhD, and it's better than your PhD. It's one of those kind of deals. And as it turned out, her PhD is better than mine, so what am I talking about? Cultural values can influence feelings about family structure and responsibilities. Yeah, actually something happened in Grant, right? There's a group, some kind of a cult, that were molesting, and somebody died and they didn't tell anybody for like 18 months after this kid died. Okay, so yeah, you gotta to accept all of that, because it really all depends on the culture. I guess that cult is white supremacist?
It's a Christian group. It just says Christian group.
Just a different
So,
Christian
yeah,
group?
Christian commune.
Paramilitary Christian.
Yeah, there we go, the paramilitary.
Oh, I saw the guy with the 2 stars on his hat.
Because they
Yeah.
had generals and colonels.
Cool.
What town was that at?
Grants.
Grant?
Yeah, kind of interesting. In many Asian societies, adult children are expected to provide shelter and care for their elderly parents. And this is the way it is in Asian cultures. So somebody in the family is going to have to take care of the old man or the old lady. You tell I'm white. Here I'm talking about old men and old women. Okay. But somebody has to take care of them. In other native cultures, that's the way it's done as well. I don't know about this. I haven't figured this culture out completely, of course. Is that the way it works here? You take care of your...
I think eventually one person usually doesn't leave.
Somebody
someone
doesn't leave.
usually always stays near the family, I think,
Okay.
the way I've
Just
observed it. Yeah, it's not required, it's not even like assumed.
Does
It's
the family
just-
vote?
No, there's none of that. It's kind of just whoever decides to stay can stay.
That's how it is within my family. My
That's
aunt
the way it
takes-
is in
Yeah,
your
my aunt takes care of my grandmother, and
Okay.
she chooses to. Nobody.
So are you going to have to stay here and take care of somebody? When
All my siblings are out, so I'm the only one at home.
the only
So
one
he's
home?
already doing that.
You're already doing it? Okay. Well, that's what happened in my family. My parents got older and older and older, and my brother, who had PTSD from Vietnam, was living in the house. And eventually, at first they were taking care of him. For decades, they were taking care of him. Then as they got more and more infirm, he started taking care of them. As confusing as that is. But of course, he can't handle death at all. So he didn't go to either of my parents' funerals. He wouldn't even go to the hospital. He dropped him off at the emergency room, but he couldn't deal with death because of his PTSD. In some cultures, parents and other older family members expect to be involved in decisions concerning marriage and money spent by the adult children. I don't know if that is true here. I don't remember. I put this picture up. I don't know if that's true here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah. In my family, if somebody told me how to spend my money, if my dad told me how to spend my money, I'd probably say really mean things to him.
That's the That's something that's kind of changing now, like with the younger couples, like the
Mhm.
younger married couples now. You know, they're a little bit more, I'd say, independent in their intentions on how they want to direct their families, and they have a better idea of what they want for their families. So that's usually kind of, I think, will cause a conflict, and it kind of has been.
Hmm.
And then for the other one before that, the
Yeah.
slide before that, there's a saying with parents, you know, it's if you take real good care of your kids and you teach them right and you give them the right values, they will come back to you and take care of you.
Yep.
So it's something that's.
It's possible I wasn't raised right. Oh, but my dad didn't tell me who to marry. Boy.
But you're here now.
Yeah, been married 3 times. He likes my current one, or he liked my current one. He's passed now. Yeah, he liked Karen. The Colonel. I have 3. There are 3 Colonel Bradways. My dad was a Colonel Bradway. My wife's a Colonel Bradway, and I have a brother that's a Colonel Bradway. That ain't me. I was Sergeant Bradway. Okay, it's time to stop. Why don't we stop right here, and we'll pick it up at the this lovely picture next time.